Okay, good evening, everybody. My name is Bertrand. I'm also a freelance developer. I'm doing other activities like audit, advising companies. I'm specialized in open source things. So, and nowadays, a lot of companies invest in open source, so it's pretty good. But tonight, I will try to give you a generic talk about something that I discovered a few months ago, and which I'm working with for the last months with some companies, so already some companies. It's called Svelte. Some of you already have tried Svelte or know about it? Just, okay. Maybe you can have a drink when I'm doing my talk, because it will be very generic. So I structure it with basic things, but then I've kept some time to let you maybe show you some parts that you might want to show. So don't hesitate to interrupt me. You can interrupt me, and I will try to show you and to especially what I like. That will be about Svelte. So it's a brand new thing. So it was brand new in the 80s or the 90s. I was young, but it's a new kid on the block. So it's not that new. Svelte is here from something like closer. Yeah, Svelte is here from something like 3 years, but it was incubating. So it was in the prototyping phase. And last year, with a mind-blowing talk, the author of Svelte has unveiled to the world the last version, which is a game changer in the front-end world. So, from my position, it's a game changer in the front-end world. So, beyond the hype, we are facing a new way of building web application today. So, and Svelte is not the only one doing web applications that way. So you have to understand it. It's not a runtime application as you used to have, which we used to have with first jQuery. You download jQuery, it's executed, parsed on your web page, and you can do stuff with it. Then same with other libraries, which are executed at runtime. So when you load the page, the library loads, it executes, and then you can do stuff. Here, it's a totally different approach. Svelte is not a runtime framework, it's just, and yeah, it's where it's completely different, it's just a compiler. It's like another compiler, TypeScript, Babel, I don't know. It takes something and transform it in something else, compiler. But this compiler has a purpose, a goal, which is to build web application based on best practices from today, let's say, components, so atomic components. Best practices from today, atomic components. Let's build a compiler which will help us to do that with optimization, with how we want it to be done in 2019. What you need to know, compared to if you used to use React or maybe Vue, it's a different type of framework, because here it's a real framework. It's not just a component or a library to render some components in the DOM. Here we are a complete battery included framework. So it's a completely battery included framework, opinionated. It will tell you how you do things. And then it will compile your components to the target, which is the target is meant to be run in web browsers. I will go over some of the aspects of Svelte. One aspect which is interesting, it's the one screen rule. So when you work developer experience as a developer, when you've started all web development, you have started to have some HTML, some JavaScript, some CSS, and 3 files, 3 screens. And And this is what we have with Svelte. It tries to make it fit in one screen. Your component, while you develop, should fit in one screen. So I think it should look familiar to you. So does someone doesn't understand that? So if you have done web development, you should be able to understand that. So it's crazy. You have some JavaScript, then I guess it's some CSS, and at the end some HTML. So there is some weird things like this bracket at the end around the event. So if I open this this example, I have a variable, so I can change ParisJS to .js, and it renders. We can see, we can apply color. So yes, it's not the mind-blowing framework I'm going to present you, but you can already have the concept. One screen, you have everything: JavaScript, CSS, HTML, and it will compile to vanilla JavaScript and CSS. I will come back to that point. The point is, it's a compiler, so it's done to make you work easily with those three technologies. With the web standard, here we have the web standard: JavaScript, CSS, HTML. But you need some more easy way to work with it. So, for example, if you want to replace a variable, here I have a variable here, and the value of this variable is replaced by the value when you render the component. Another notion which is from the ground up, which is built with Svelte, is everything has been made to prevent you from writing boilerplate code. So if I open another example, you start to have something less usual, I would say. If you see export let something, we are starting to go into what we call the alien syntax, the syntax that comes from the space. So the principle in Svelte is to say, okay, we need some tools to improve the developer experience, to make people write much less code. Less code means less bugs. If we want people to write less code, we will add syntax helpers, entry points for the compiler to do something. Here, if I export a variable, it will make it available publicly on the component. Then each variable can be bound directly to the DOM. So here we have something like active, a variable active, which can be true or false. And this active variable, based on this state, if it's true, the class active will be set. If it's not true, the class won't be set. If you have worked in web development, you have struggled with classes. So I have struggled with classes for years. So how to make them into properties, to make them into the state, to here, the state of the variables can be directly bound to a classes. So you name your variable something else, you say classes colon something else, and the value will change. So for example, here I have my really fancy button. If he has the active class, he will have this color. It's okay. This is my button. I don't know if you see well. I can increase the font as well. So I'm using that button in the application, and if there is an active variable, the state will change. What it does here, active, or I can say active is true, it will bind it to this variable, which will bind it to the class. So it will add class equal active, yes, no. When you have worked with classes and components, it's something simple, but it makes sense. You don't want to mess with classes. You just need to have your classes reflecting your state. You have a state, you want to render something. The component reflects your state on the machine. So it's simple as that. And we are something which just makes sense. So, and instead of writing some concatenation, some assignation, we just do some binding through this syntax. Okay. One of the key points of Svelte is the reactivity. It means when you change something somewhere, you can make the value change also somewhere else. And if you bind multiple values to other things, you can have references to the value of this variable somewhere else. The best example of reactive application is Excel. You put something in a cell, you make a reference to that cell, you can change it somewhere else, somewhere else, somewhere else, and all references update themselves always. We want to do that in web application. Reactivity, because web application should be handled in the time. Or here, if you are talking about games, reactivity is a key point of having games. So we have, in my opinion, we have been used to have web application which was not made based on a time frame, which was conceptualized as something static with just some part which had some states that change. No, a web application is something living, so it lives, and it can have completely different state over the times. And this concept of reactivity is the heart of modern web application development. And here we are completely in the alien syntax of Svelte. So you will get used to this syntax, and actually this syntax is not something completely crazy. It's a valid JavaScript syntax here, this crazy dollar in the middle of nowhere. It's a valid JavaScript syntax, it's called label. It's on the spec from a long time, it's called label. So if you create a label, and with this small trick, dollar, colon, you will be able to declare that this sentence, this statement, will be re-executed each time one of those variables, of the value of those variables changes. So what it means? I have this variable, temperature in Fahrenheit. If this variable changes anywhere, this complete statement will be executed a new time. If you have used RxJS, CycleJS, for example, all of those reactive frameworks are based on the concept of observing. You will observe change and react on what you observe. Here, you don't have to do it. No boilerplate. The compiler will check, okay, this value may change. It will instrument the code, and it will optimize it, and and each time the value changes, with a principle of invalidation, it will run this statement again and trigger the rendering of the DOM part a new time. So, how it works? There is two parts to understand. That reactive statement, double data binding. If the value of temperature in Fahrenheit changes, the whole statement is executed, so temperature in Celsius will be reassigned. Here, I have an input with the temperature in Fahrenheit, and I'm binding the value here. I'm binding the value to the variable temperature Fahrenheit. It means if I change it in the input field, it will change the value of the variable temperature Fahrenheit, change the reference, and then the reactive statement will be executed a second time. Double data binding. I'm changing the DOM updates the model re-renders the DOM. Double data binding. If you have done some Angular, for example, or early versions of Angular, you had this double data binding by default, always, everywhere, which was creating a lot of issues in debugging, performances. Here, you have to declare yourself what is reactive in your application. And then the compiler will take it and optimize it for you. It looks weird. I completely agree. The author agree with it, but in a few minutes you get used to it, and then it's like everything. You get used to it. The concept behind this is say, okay, I want reactive statements in JavaScript. I will create a spec in ECMAScript. I will have to wait 10 years between there is the first implementation. The principle here is let's not wait. Let's use them today. And if hopefully in 5 or 10 years we will have reactive statements in the language, great. Today we don't. Let's do it by compilation. So if I change this value, the other field updates. So, and each time it changes, these whole blocks get re-rendered. You don't even have to mess with this set state. Set state will re-render. Maybe if it's in a callback, it won't re-render. Yes, you don't have to take care of this. The compiler will do it for you. Yes?
Does the whole doc re-render or only
the component? And then if you are in the component tree, it will be optimized. So it means it will, if you have 3 components that contain this reactive statement, it's a component tree. So if it's assigned, you declare an API by attribute. The attribute is bound also to another variable which is reactive. It will invalidate only the tree of the components that changes. So Svelte doesn't work with a virtual DOM. It works with another technique which actually is there from years and years, which is called invalidation. So it works with invalidation. So the compiler will observe change. If there is a reactive statement somewhere, it will, thanks to all those AST parser, it will check this is a variable, it's inside the reactive statement. I will decorate it, instrument it with an invalidator, and each time the value change through an observer. Behind it there is an observer. If the value change, it will invalidate the value and trigger a re-render only for that part of the DOM. Inside the tree, so it's tree walking principle. Another key point of Svelte, comparing to the other framework, and it's also for me a game changer, because here the style is included in the framework. So you don't have to worry the way. Excusez-moi, la télé, ça a été éteint. Oh, fine. So the style is included in the framework. So what it means? Here, in my component, you can see it's not a bad practice what I'm doing. I'm not scoping my component on purpose. I have a p tag with 2 classes, so a p. I can style my p tag directly. Svelte will handle for me the scoping. I don't have to use BEM. I don't have to use scoping. I don't have to care about anything else than styling my tags within the component. And I can show you. I have one component, which is this p tag. I have just one p tag, which has very nice styles. Then I'm using this component, so close to another p tag in another component. So I have 2 components. One has p tag, it will render a p tag in the DOM. I have another component which uses that one. Both of them will render p tag. If you inspect them, you have p and p DOM because it's a semantic I've chosen. But as you can see, my awesome fancy tag with this dashed border is only applied to my component. And it's really important, all styles, everything you do is scoped principle of component atomicity. So if you don't have to use techniques, some workarounds to defeat the CSS cascade, you just need to use it. So you want to style a P inside your component, use a P. And then the compiler will take care of that point. It will generate a unique class per component, and then it will apply the style only for this class. Actually, it goes even further. You have some options in the compiler. You will be able to compile the style per component, so it will be inside the generated JavaScript. Or you can also have, for performances, it's performance-oriented, the possibility to include the styles of all your components in a shared CSS for performances, because it's more performant to reparse only one CSS than including the style dynamically, like style components do, for example. So in terms of performances, it's much more performant to include the style. So if you want to work in a design system with atomic components, let's keep the system with style included in each component. In any case, they will be scoped. However, if you want to render something more optimized at the end, you can even take them and extract them from each component and render them into a dedicated style sheet. Still, for the styles, there is another key point. Since styles is included, and this is part of the styling, Svelte manage also by default motions, transitions, and animations. You have access to a library to create transition for your components. You will add the state transition into your component. You have access also to animations. You can change the values, add easing effect, and so on. And you can also create your own animations. So you can add your own animation. And what it will do, it will compile them to the most efficient way to render the animation or the transition. So for example, if I keep it just by adding the fade and fly transition to my component, again, it's done on the common sense, in, out, when the state comes in, when the state came out. So you transition, and you can configure them. So it's one of a really nice point of Svelte. Another point, it handles also the state. So there is a way, you are not obliged to use it, but there is also a way to manage the state into that. There is two ways actually. Central state management, so a state that can be shared for all your components, and contextualized state management. For example, you have 3 or 4 components. You want them to share a state, but you don't want this state to be shared between all components. You can have contextual states and global states. It's pretty easy. You need to comply to an API. This API is 3 functions: subscribe, set, update. So again, observing, you subscribe to changes. So if it changes, you will be able to react to it, and you can change the value, and update the value. Here, I merge it with my own thing, and I can just include the state, and again, with this syntax shortcut, you add, instead of replacing the variable directly, you replace it with a $. It will handle the state, and here, if anywhere else the variable is changing, the value will be changed here too. Again, reactivity, it will be instrumented by default. So if I change the value, it will change directly. So here I'm changing my state, move up, move right, move down, move left. I'm changing my state, and here it will directly call the subscribe method to change the value dynamically. So the last point is, in web development, the size matters. So we had this conversation, you need to bundle, always optimize things. But in Svelte, what actually happens? When you compile your component, you end up with only the feature you are using for that component. It will create a vanilla JavaScript and CSS version of your component that can run without Svelte. So you include them, you make component is new component, and you have it, you can call the API. So it's, if you are used to, even the compiled version is readable. So here you see it will create a fragment. Creating a fragment is to create a DOM, an element in the DOM detached, and then you attach it. This kind of techniques. And if you are used to, you can really read the generated source code. In terms of size, all benchmarks, so once bundled, it's the frameworks that produce the smallest bundle because there is no framework. So you have only the code of the component and only the code of the feature you are using. So if you don't use the transition, you won't have the transition into your bundle. And yes. So I don't know if there is some time left.
Maybe we can have questions.
Yes, maybe we can have questions. So you can find me on Twitter, and also I will be pleased to talk about Svelte after. There is also topics that I didn't address: accessibility by design. You have accessibility warnings, integrations with other tools, and so on.
Do you have any questions?
What exactly does the compiler spit out? Well, you're giving it proprietary HTML, proprietary JavaScript, proprietary CSS.
Yes.
It compiles that, and it makes a web app.
Yes.
What does it create
It's
that we then use afterwards? What is this bundle that you speak of?
okay. So I can show you quickly. Yeah, I was pretty sure the question. The compiler is pretty open, so you can have multiple layouts. So the compiler should be bound with a bundling tool like Rollup or Webpack. So the compiler itself will just create one JavaScript file or one CSS files or multiple per component. And then if you combine it with a bundler, Rollup, Parcel, Webpack, you will be able to optimize it and have the layout you want. Everything in one final JavaScript file or everything in multiple ones. For example, here, it's something I did for a design system. I've bundled all my components separately, and each of those JavaScript files contains also the CSS. So they are completely independent, atomic components. I'm able to export them separately. So here I have a file called button.bundle.js. It contains my full component, and how I can use it. I can just load it in a script tag, okay? And here, with Rollup, I've used EFE function. So I'm using from window, but you can compile to ESM, to AMD or CommonJS, and it just exports a button component. You create button is new button. You target a DOM element, document.body, and you add the property, and you can bind the event. It's what it did. So it compiles you to a standalone component Or if you want to create here it's for a design system, so you bundle. I would like to bundle everything separately. But if you create a web application, a website, you can have everything bundled at the same time in the same JavaScript file, and you will import it, create new application, you add it to a DOM node, and it renders automatically. Does it answer your question? Yeah.
Any other question?
When I was playing it with it, it didn't have TypeScript support. They said it was planned. Do you know anything about it?
It's planned. From the Svelte compiler itself is written in TypeScript. It's planned to support it. Speaking only for myself, I don't really care because I don't like TypeScript at all. So for me, it's not a priority. But some people are asking for it, and it's only to make a parser for TypeScript. I think it's just a matter of time and priority. So it's in the roadmap. Just I have no more information, but it's in the roadmap.
Compared to Vue or React or Angular, what's the size of the community on Svelte and every packages we can have on Vue or other JS frameworks? How many packages are available?
Okay, so it's a brand new project, which means it has a small community right now, but it's growing, and the community is very reactive. Of course, you don't have the 5 years of history of React, and you don't have all the tools. However, when I've evaluated Svelte, I've taken that into account, and in a few months frame, we saw a lot of tools being created recently. So this is on the good way. It's nothing compared to the community of Vue or React. Nothing. So to be honest, but it's building, and yes. So if you follow Svelte on Twitter, or if you follow the creator of Svelte, you will see a lot of things happening right now. But in terms of community, of course, the community is much, much smaller. Yeah.
Hi, thanks for the intro. Sounds like the user experience is something of a priority for Svelte. So I wonder, when you have the HTML, JavaScript, and the style sheets all in one page, do you have any linters planned? Because otherwise, it sounds pretty.
It's not planned. It's here. So there is an ESLint plugin for Svelte, and there is a Prettier plugin for Svelte, and there is also plugins for IDEs. So in terms of tooling, yes, it's the beginning, but it's sufficient for now. There is still some small issues. For example, you can, instead of using CSS, you can use another language. You can use Sass or PostCSS very easily. And sometimes the linters, the Prettier config, or I'm using Vim, it works perfectly, but some colleagues use Visual Studio Code, it works less well, but it's the beginning, so the take on that is, yeah, it will get better and better with the time, but the tooling is just getting started.
I just have a simple next question. Is that in your own experience, how painful were the major version upgrades? Because like people who have used Rails or just Webpack in general, any major version upgrades have been relatively painful. So what would you say the Svelte experience?
Yes, it's a good question. I didn't add a major upgrade of Svelte yet because the version 3 has changed the paradigm. So I didn't have worked at all with the previous version. I started with the version 3, which is the current version. It's 3.15. It follows semantic versioning, so there is no breaking of features. And so far, I've not also had blockers in terms of bugs or upgrades. Everything went pretty smoothly so far. We had some very small issues, for example, when you add HTML commands outside of the script tag, then the source map was not accurate. Well, this was the bug that was the most painful for me. So it should be it's relatively small. So
how you handle routing, switching between views? There
yes,
is some debugging solution, or you based on this store and state?
there is the exact same routers and React router or Vue router written in Svelte. I would personally advocate maybe it won't be a best practice in all the cases. There is case there it fits, there is case this kind of routing doesn't fit. So it's my personal advice. However, there is one, so you can do it. After, Svelte advocates for another model, which I didn't introduce. It's called Sepper. It's a mix of server-side rendering and routing. So it will mix the both with multiple one-page, multiple single page with routing and server-side rendering. Again, optimized for performances. What you should take in mind is that Svelte doesn't target desktop nor mobile. It targets the embed world. The goal of Svelte is to target all users. So users with a smartwatch or a user with a mobile in Africa.
Maybe the last question? Okay, we'll have plenty more time later for
Yeah,
questions.
thank you very much.